So while the eyes of the world are on the Gulf guy, I thought we'd have another look at what's happening in Ukraine. And I'm going to stick my neck out here because I think there are developments that perhaps we haven't seen, which are happening, which may be quite surprising to our audience, I think. Um, You'll have seen over the last few days, specifically today, there's been heavy bombing and loads of drones sent over by the Russians, which have killed, I think, it's 15 people in Ukraine,
Yeah.
in Kiev overnight, which is disgusting, as you would expect. At the same time, there have been battlefield gains by the Ukrainians who've started taking back some of the gains that the Russians have made over the last few months, over the last year. And that would appear to be because the Ukrainian development of drones is far more sophisticated than those that the Russians are using. And they're now, according to most analysts, the Ukrainians, this is, winning the drone war. I don't know whether you saw on the TV the other day, I thought it was quite interesting. They actually took a unit of Russian soldiers without any physical involvement at all. It was just drones, apparently, and ground-based robots that got these guys to surrender. They filmed it all, so you could see it actually happening. But on top of that, I would point to what was said yesterday. You read this? Our friend Sergei Lavrov, good friend of the show, obviously the foreign minister of Russia, was making a statement yesterday. I just want to read you some of that because it's interesting to try and interpret it. Moscow remains committed to the agreements reached at the summit with Washington in Anchorage, which was obviously the big meeting that he had with Putin there, with President Vladimir Putin having repeatedly reaffirmed its position that Russia accepted proposals made by the USA in Alaska in good faith, the de jure recognition of the realities on the ground in Ukraine. I don't know whether you'll remember, but the realities on the ground and the realities on the ground in Ukraine at the moment would effectively mean freezing the lines of combat where they are at the moment. Up to now, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, they've been suggesting that the Ukrainians should be giving up areas of the Donbass and retreating and pulling their troops back and giving the Russians, not staying where you are. That would suggest to me, my reading of this is that the balance has changed and they want to cash in effectively all that they've got rather than lose any further territory. We'll go on because it's also said here, this is the same statement yesterday, agreements reached at the Alaska summit are being blocked by European leaders in Brussels, Paris, Berlin and London. Lavrov stressed the proposals by France and the United Kingdom to deploy stabilisation contingents, as he calls them. This is what we would call the coalition of the willing, obviously, in Ukraine would require US technological support, noting that French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer are promoting the idea but cannot implement it independently. That doesn't sound like what we were hearing before about there's no way that we will accept the coalition of the willing. That's effective.
No,
That's a
you're right.
changed nuance, isn't it, to what we've heard
It is
before?
a changed nuance.
It's effectively saying, that they need American help to do it, but that's not saying we wouldn't accept it in any fashion.
So you then say, well, if it is a changed nuance and not just some misinformation, deliberate misinformation, then why would they do that? So, as you said earlier, it's widely reported that Ukraine are making some gains on the battlefield. I think we said last week that the Russians are now recruiting fewer soldiers than they are losing through death or injury, which obviously has a drip, drip, drip effect. As I've said millions of times, the effect on the Russian economy of a third of their GDP being in the military and sanctions and everything else is significant. Now, it might have had this temporary fillip from the Iran war, but there's still those structural issues.
Well, that, of course, has changed today. I don't know whether you've heard the news that they haven't extended the exemption, the Americans, to Russian oil having a pass. They stopped that. So that's...
I wasn't so much referring to that. I was just referring to the fact that Mr. Putin would be getting more dollars per barrel because of the global increase in oil prices from, what was it, about 60 odd to 100. So it was more that than letting those tankers through. So I'm just trying to think, well, what's changed? So you've got that. And, you do hear occasionally, and it's all hearsay, but there's a sort of groundswell of opinion in Russia that the people are not overly happy with all this. Everyone probably by now knows somebody who's been killed or injured in the war, and they have access to Telegram, don't they? The non-state control. They'll know the other side of the story, not all of them, but a proportion of them. So it sort of makes sense that Lavrov et al. would make advances.
Yeah.
But we've got to remember that even where it sits, Ukraine would have to hold that line, because if they were to give up the territory that they were originally asked to give up, they'd be giving up the high ground. And which they just cannot strategically. And then you've got the issue of their constitution, haven't you? Yeah. Which doesn't allow it. So it's complicated.
It is complicated. It is, and I'd agree with that. I think what's interesting is that there is clearly movement to a degree, yes. I think, from the Russian side in terms of it's a bit more nuanced, their position, if what Lavrov is saying is correct. What I think also has moved the dial a bit is what's happened in Hungary. In terms of funding. He mentions Hungary. I'll just read you that bit as well. Lavrov added that Russia remains open to dialogue with other countries, including Hungary, stating that Moscow has never avoided engagement and that Vladimir Putin has consistently demonstrated readiness for dialogue, while stressing that talks are most meaningful, and this is the interesting bit, when partners represent their country's national interests. You recall that Orban in Hungary was buying loads and loads of Russian oil and gas at a cheap rate. I mean, that's what the argument is here, that you should remember that we won't sell you effectively cheap Russian unless you talk to us. So they're trying to hold them over, quite literally hold them over a barrel. It'd be interesting to see what happens in the future with that regard. But the figures with regard, because I've been looking at that as well, that releases, because this guy is pro-European, Magyar, who's taken over.
He is, isn't he? Yeah.
That he's already said that he won't block this fund that the European Union have put together to support Ukraine over the next 2 years, which is 90 billion euros. So that will keep Ukraine in the fight, if you like, over the next 2 years. Whereas previously, to put you in the picture, I was looking at the figures, the total aid that Ukraine has received from the European Union since this all kicked off in 2022, so we're looking 4 years ago, is 195 billion euros. So it's about 50 billion euros a year, virtually, isn't it, at the end of the day? And now they're looking at pumping, which they're going to get agreement from now, from Hungary, who were blocking it, this extra 90 billion euros. Most of it, I guess, will go to buy munitions and to
from America
and from here. I mean, this big drone factory, which we'll come on to in a minute, that has been set up outside Leicester, is due to be producing 120,000 drones it's a Ukrainian company, for the Ukrainian market within the next year. So that's quite interesting in itself. And I think this is what's preying to a certain extent on Putin's mind. As you were suggesting just now, it's the longevity of how long can Russia go on losing this number of people and having to their economy, which is not doing very well. And before people start to say, this isn't going to work. The only problem is he's got the same issue really as Trump has in the Gulf. How is he, if he were to settle now, going to take this back, having lost, a million lives? How's he going to take that back to the Russian people and sell that?
I guess, given their structure, he doesn't have to sell too hard. He's basically president for life, isn't he? So it's not as if anyone can kick him out.
It's not like Trump in that respect. No.
So, but nevertheless, he's got his pride and his dignity, and probably quite a lot of that. It's a very difficult sell because already people over there, they've obviously lost Western product. They've got very high inflation, high interest rates. I don't think they've ever had, at least over here, we've had a period where inflation and interest rates have reduced from those peaks. That hasn't happened over there because of the inflationary effect of the war effort, pumping more money in to one small part of the economy. You can imagine what state public services are in as well if a third of all GDP has gone on the war effort. Yeah, it's if it means they have to draw the lines where they are, and that's about the best of it. It's not a great sell, as you say, but it probably can be spun as such.
Yeah.
And the question is, do they come back again? Do they come back again?
That's right. I mean, just to bring you right up to date, this afternoon, and this is breaking news, the Russian Ministry of Defense have issued a list of, I think it's 12 targets within Europe that they are suggesting they might hit. These are production centres for drones. We were talking just now about this drone production centre outside Leicester. They said that they're part of the wider Ukrainian war, and now whether this is all bluff and threat again to frighten people in terms of don't do it, only time will tell, won't it? But it does suggest that they're getting quite worried about where this conflict is going. If they're looking at spreading it further, I would suggest they're clearly concerned about the fact that the Ukrainians have this financial and military support behind them. So, this story will no doubt run and run. I think it's interesting that the slight nuance, we haven't heard it from Putin himself, so he might come out tomorrow and change all this. But it does sound as though things are slowly grinding to a halt in Ukraine, but we'll see where we go.
If it was any way an indication of an end to the conflict, then I think we would all be very grateful to see that.
Absolutely.